800 U.S. Marines were caught in a tactical situation that should have been a guaranteed defeat. Lieutenant Colonel Merritt, Red Mike, Edson received intelligence. 2,500 Japanese soldiers were moving through the jungle, attempting to surround a position on a ridge south of Henderson Field. Every military manual gave the same answer. When outnumbered 3-1 and facing encirclement, you withdraw immediately, find better ground, and call for reinforcements. But Edson looked at his exhausted Marines, low on ammunition with nowhere to retreat, and made a decision that defied all textbook doctrine. He ordered his men to tighten their perimeter, let the enemy come closer, even allow the encirclement to complete. In the sweltering, dark jungle of Pacific, the Japanese closed in from 3 sides, confident they would shatter the American resistance in a devastating night assault. Yet, what happened next utterly overturned all conventional wisdom about defensive warfare, turning a seemingly hopeless battle into one of the most lopsided victories in Marine Corps history. Interactive break. Before we continue the story, I'd love to know where you're from and how much you know about the Battle of Guadalcanal. Feel free to comment below. Have you heard the story of what happened after the Marines were surrounded? As night fell over the ridge on September 13th, the humid air moving through the jungle pressed down on the Marines like a living thing. Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson walked his defensive line with a steady pace that seemed to have already accepted the odds of death. 800 Marines against 2,500 confirmed Japanese troops advancing through the jungle. The numbers didn't lie, but Edson understood that numbers rarely told the whole story. This ridge wasn't even worthy of being called a hill, just a low, coral and volcanic rock swell, rising about 60 feet above the surrounding jungle, stretching roughly 1,000 yards north to south. To strategists in Washington, it was insignificant, but the Marines dug in on its slopes. It was a line that would determine whether Henderson Field was held, and the Pacific Campaign kept from total collapse. The airstrip lay just 800 yards to the north, close enough to hear the occasional cough of aircraft engines starting before dawn. Edson deployed his men with the precision of a chess player. The 1st Raider Battalion held the northern end of the ridge, closest to Henderson Field. The 1st Parachute Battalion stretched out along the southern approach. The 2 units formed interlocking fields of fire covering every jungle approach. But Edson knew firepower alone wouldn't save them. The Japanese had already proven they were willing to absorb horrific casualties to achieve an objective, and Major General Kyoto Kawaguchi's force, 3 times the size of Edson's, was closing in under cover darkness. The Marines had been fighting on Guadalcanal for over a month. The jungle had taught them survival lessons no training manual covered. By day, dampness made all metal blisteringly hot. By night, condensation made everything slick. Canvas rotted within weeks. Food spoiled in days. Men lost weight rapidly, and tropical diseases sapped their strength. But they had also learned to use the jungle's unique acoustics, listening for the subtle sounds in the dense undergrowth that betrayed enemy movement. As Edson made his rounds, he found Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone adjusting his Browning M1917 water-cooled heavy machine gun. This World War I-era relic weighed 41 pounds without its tripod, but could tear men apart at 1,500 yards with sustained fire. Basilone had already proven his worth in previous engagements. The calm competence under fire that separated veterans from the replacements just arrived from the States. "Situation, Gunny?" Edson asked, crouching by the machine gun nest. "Enough to make M think twice about coming up that slope, Colonel." Basilone's voice carried the calm confidence Edson had come to rely on. "Though if the Japs are serious, I wouldn't mind a few more cases." 20 yards of Basilone's left, Private First Class Robert Mudd had finished his foxhole. His Springfield rifle was clean, loaded, bayonet fixed. The young Marine had arrived on Guadalcanal just 3 weeks prior, his face still holding the softness of stateside training camps. But the jungle was already shaping him. His uniform hung loose on a thinning frame. His eyes held a specific kind of alertness. He knew death could come from any direction without warning. From intelligence reports and captured documents, Edson understood the Japanese tactical reliance on speed and shock. Kawaguchi's men had marched for 3 days through the jungle, following trails only the most experienced guides could follow in daylight. They planned a coordinated 3-pronged night attack relying on numerical superiority and the psychological impact of night fighting to overwhelm the American positions. What the Japanese hadn't anticipated was a meticulous defensive preparation Edson had completed over the past week. Every approach to the ridge had been reconnoitered, measured, and pre-registered for artillery fire. The Marines had cleared fields of fire through the jungle undergrowth, channeling attack routes into predetermined killing zones. Despite supply shortages, barbed wire obstacles were cleverly placed to slow the enemy advance and funnel them into the most effective ranges. Furthermore, the Americans possessed an advantage not mentioned in Kawaguchi's intelligence reports. Their training emphasized individual initiative and adaptability, which proved crucial in the chaos of night combat. Unlike the Japanese, who relied heavily on coordinated tactics, American Marines were trained to fight effectively as individuals, even when larger units disintegrated under fire. As darkness deepened, the sound of the jungle began to change. The normal chorus of insects and nocturnal creatures gave way to an unnatural silence. Every experienced Marine knew this was the prelude to contact. In the darkness below the ridge, thousands of Japanese soldiers were moving into position, their presence sensed even by the jungle's wildlife. Edson completed his final rounds, speaking in low tones with squad leaders, checking ammunition stores. Each rifleman had about 200 rounds, plus grenades, mortars, and the heavy machine guns that would be the backbone of the defense. It wasn't abundant, but it was enough for men who had learned to make every shot count. Reports crackled over the colonel's radio from outposts scattered in the jungle. Japanese forces were moving along 3 separate trails, confirming the intelligence about a multi-pronged attack. The enemy was close now. Occasionally, the short, clipped syllables of Japanese military commands could be heard in the brush. At 11:45 p.m., the first Japanese mortar rounds landed on the ridge. The explosions were scattered and uncoordinated, indicating Kawaguchi's troops were still moving into position, trying to adjust their indirect fire. But the shelling served its intended psychological purpose. It told the Marines a long-awaited fight was finally beginning. Edson entered his command post at the ridge's highest point, a shallow pit protected by sandbags from which he could observe the entire line and maintain radio contact with Henderson Field. Artillery batteries at the airfield stood ready, guns loaded and aimed at pre-plotted target areas. When the first wave of Japanese infantry erupted from the jungle like a human avalanche, the night descended into chaos. They screamed the traditional banzai, charge cry that had terrified Allied forces across the Pacific, and surged toward the Marine positions. The real test had begun, but as they charged up the ridge's slopes, they encountered something Kawaguchi's tactical planning hadn't anticipated. The Americans didn't break. They didn't retreat. Instead, they responded with disciplined, precise fire that turned the hillside into a slaughterhouse. Basilon's heavy machine gun began its deadly work at 800 yards. The Browning's heavy rounds sighed through charging Japanese soldiers like wheat. The water-cooled barrel allowed for sustained firing, an advantage bolt-action rifles couldn't match. And Basilone had positioned his gun to enfilade the main approaches. Each short burst sent 5 to 7 rounds downrange in less than 2 seconds. At that distance, every hit was fatal. The Japanese attack followed conventional infantry tactics, emphasizing speed and shock. They had hoped to close quickly with the American positions, using darkness and numbers to compensate for their firepower disadvantage. But the ridge's terrain held flaws no pre-attack reconnaissance could have revealed. The Marines had spent weeks studying every approach, every fold in the ground, every piece of cover an attacker might use. PFC mud sighted through his Springfield sights. Squeeze the trigger and watch a Japanese soldier stumble and fall on the slope 50 yards away. The young Marine worked the bolt smoothly, ejecting the spent casing, chambering a new round. Months of training had engraved the motion into muscle memory. Around him, the distinctive crack of American rifles established a steady rhythm, interwoven with the deeper roar of the heavy machine guns. Kawaguchi's fundamental miscalculation lay in his understanding of American defensive doctrine. Japanese military thought emphasized the spiritual superiority of the offensive, believing determined infantry could overcome any obstacle through sheer willpower. American doctrine, by contrast, focused on maximizing firepower, creating interlocking fields of fire that destroyed the enemy before they reached effective range. The Marines had turned the ridge into a fortress that leveraged every advantage of modern weaponry. Japanese troops advancing toward the ridge's southern end met the first devastating blow. American mortar rounds began exploding among their ranks. The Marines had pre-registered all likely approaches during daylight, measuring distances and calculating firing solutions. Now, in darkness, those calculations paid off. High explosive shells detonated with lethal accuracy among dense groups of Japanese infantry. Sergeant Watanabe led his squad through the underbrush, desperately seeking cover as American bullets whizzed past, and mortar fragments tore through the jungle canopy. The veteran non-commissioned officer had participated in multiple successful night attacks across the Pacific, but this was different. American fire was too precise, too sustained, too coordinated to be panic fired by frightened defenders shooting blindly into the dark. These Marines were aiming, and Japanese soldiers were dying faster than they could advance. When the second wave burst from the jungle and saw the ground ahead littered with their comrades' bodies, Kawaguchi began to understand a brutal tactical reality. The Americans hadn't just stopped the first attack. They had shattered the attacking force's cohesion with devastating efficiency. Japanese squad and platoon leaders, the veteran NCOs who held units together in combat, were being systematically eliminated by American sharpshooters who had learned to identify high-value targets by muzzle flashes and the movement patterns of attacking infantry. Edson monitored the battle from his command post, receiving reports from subordinate commanders and calling in artillery support from Henderson Field. The colonel understood this was no mere Japanese probe. Kawaguchi had committed significant forces. The enemy's stubbornness indicated they viewed the ridge as a key objective, but Edson also recognized that the Japanese attack followed a fundamentally flawed pattern, and his Marines were trained and equipped to exploit those flaws perfectly. American artillery batteries at Henderson Field had pre-registered target areas around the ridge. Now, those guns began their destructive work. 155mm howitzers could deliver high explosive shells with near surgical precision. Forward observers maintained constant communication with the gunners, adjusting fire. Each shell had a fragmentation kill radius of up to 40 yards, and the guns could fire 4 rounds per minute. Japanese tactics relied on infiltration and close assault, but the terrain around the ridge offered limited concealment for large groups. The Marines had cleared fields of fire extending 300 yards in every direction, creating killing zones where attacking troops were exposed to concentrated fire from multiple positions. Even in darkness, the muzzle flashes of Japanese weapons gave away their locations to American gunners specifically trained to target by sound and flash signature. When the third Japanese wave attacked, Edson began employing a tactic that would later become standard U.S. doctrine in the Pacific. He made the defense active. Marines no longer held static positions but launched limited counterattacks that broke up Japanese formations before they could organize coordinated assaults. These small unit actions, led by veterans like Basilone, prevented the enemy from establishing fire support positions within effective range of the ridge. Kawaguchi's troops found themselves in a tactical nightmare their training had never addressed. The American performance bore no resemblance to the patterns Japanese intelligence had documented in earlier battles. They didn't fall back under pressure or disintegrate in the face of determined attacks. Instead, they fought with professional lethality, turning every Japanese advantage into a liability. As the battle entered its second hour, the sustained rate of fire from American weapons became the decisive factor. Japanese infantry, armed primarily with bolt-action rifles, were not only outgunned, but also outmatched in tactical employment by professionally trained Marines. The Browning heavy machine guns, supported by mortars and artillery, created an impenetrable web of destruction that no amount of personal courage could overcome. By midnight, Kawaguchi's attack had completely lost momentum. His forces were scattered and disorganized in the jungle approaches to the ridge. The general faced a choice that would determine the course of the rest of the campaign. Either commit his remaining troops to this slaughterhouse, or admit his initial strategy had failed and attempt to devise new tactics against an enemy who defied all Japanese expectations of American fighting capability. When the fourth Japanese wave disintegrated into scattered survivors struggling back into the underbrush, an eerie silence fell over the jungle. Kawaguchi had committed over 1,500 men to the attack, yet the ridge remained firmly in American hands. But the general wasn't finished yet. Before dawn on September 14th, he prepared for a final, desperate gamble. One last coordinated attack that would either break through Marine defenses or destroy his own command. Edson made his rounds again, assessing ammunition stores and repositioning men. To fill gaps torn in the line by 4 hours of continuous combat, the Marines had performed brilliantly but were showing fatigue. PFC Mud Springfield had fired over 100 rounds, more than many Marines shot in an entire month of stateside training. The rifle's recoil had made his shoulder sore, and in the darkness, he loaded 8-round clips by touch, his hands trembling slightly. The colonel's greatest concern was heavy machine gun ammunition. Basilon's crew had fired nearly 3,000 rounds and, despite the water-cooled design, had changed barrels twice to prevent overheating. The gunny reported he had about 500 rounds left, enough for one more sustained engagement, but insufficient for a prolonged fight. Similar reports came from other heavy machine gun positions scattered along the ridge. Each crew was rationing remaining ammunition while holding its firing sector. Kawaguchi had learned from his earlier failures. His final attack reflected a deeper understanding of American defensive capabilities. He abandoned the mass frontal assaults that played directly into American strengths, breaking his remaining forces into small infiltration teams, tasked with penetrating the Marine line and attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. The Japanese sacrificed the psychological shock value of the banzai charge for tactics that might actually work against disciplined defenders. The intent of this new approach became clear when American listening posts reported movement in sectors that had been quiet earlier. Small enemy groups were attempting to flank Marine positions, using ravines and thick vegetation for cover. These infiltrators carried light weapons and grenades, planning to get close enough to American positions to destroy key weapons, like heavy machine guns and mortars, through sudden, close-quarter attacks. Edson's response was to commit his reserve force from behind the main line, deploying them to counter the infiltration attempts. These were his most experienced Marines, men who had proven they could fight effectively in small units, without direct supervision. They moved through the jungle like hunters, silent and efficient, using their knowledge of the terrain to intercept the Japanese before they reached the ridge. The fighting that followed was unlike any previous phase of the battle. Marines found themselves in close combat with Japanese soldiers, who had penetrated to within 30 yards of key defensive positions. Mudd heard movement in the brush to his left, turned, and saw a Japanese infiltrator rise from concealment, a grenade in his hand. The young Marine's rifle barked, and the enemy's soldier fell, the grenade rolling harmlessly down the slope to explode in the trees. Basilon's position came under direct attack. A small group of Japanese managed to get within grenade range of his heavy machine gun as the enemy tried to rush the sandbag emplacement. The gunny and his crew fought back with pistols and rifle butts. One Japanese soldier actually reached the heavy gun itself before Basilon cut him down with a burst from his Thompson submachine gun, the dead man's body collapsing across the weapon's tripod. The intensity of the close quarters fighting created confusion along the line, but also exposed the fundamental weakness of Kawaguchi's new strategy. By fragmenting his force into small infiltration teams, the general had sacrificed the concentrated strength and momentum needed for a breakthrough. Instead of focusing his remaining power against a single weak point in the American line, he had dispersed against multiple targets, allowing Marines to defeat each in detail. American artillery continued to play a decisive role, but now the guns were sometimes targeting enemies the forward observers had spotted only yards away. The proximity of friendly troops made artillery support extremely dangerous, requiring split-second timing and precise placement to avoid casualties from friendly fire. Shell bursts briefly illuminated the hellish jungle's cape. Japanese soldiers desperately seeking cover among twisted roots and fallen logs. The battle had evolved into the kind of fighting best suited to American training and equipment. Marines excelled at small unit actions, requiring individual initiative and adaptability. Their weapons were designed for sustained fire and close-range accuracy. Most importantly, their doctrine emphasized aggressive counterattacks. that prevented the enemy from consolidating gains or establishing support positions. As dawn approached, the tactical situation shifted once more. Kawaguchi's infiltration tactics had failed to achieve a breakthrough, and daylight would expose his remaining troops to the devastating fire of defenders with perfect observation. The general faced the prospect of continuing his attack in broad daylight against opponents who had already proven they could inflict catastrophic casualties on his command. Shortly after 5 a.m., the Japanese began to withdraw. The mortar fire covering their retreat was scattered and ineffective. Through binoculars, Marines watched scattered enemy groups moving back through the jungle, discarding equipment and abandoning wounded comrades in their haste to escape the killing zone around the ridge. Edson ordered his men to hold their positions and avoid pursuit. A chase could lead them into an ambush or prepared enemy positions. The colonel understood his primary mission was defense, and he had overperformed, achieving a tactical victory beyond all reasonable expectation. His 800 Marines had not only held their ground against overwhelming odds, but had nearly destroyed a force 3 times their size. The aftermath of the battle revealed the true scale of the Japanese defeat. Scouting patrols counting enemy bodies along the approaches to the ridge tallied over 700 dead, with many more wounded evacuated during the retreat. American casualties numbered fewer than 50 killed and wounded. The exchange ratio was almost unbelievable to military analysts studying pre-battle force deployments. Kawaguchi's failure at the ridge effectively ended Japanese offensive capability on Guadalcanal, marking a turning point in the strategic landscape of the Pacific War. The 1st Marine Division had proven that disciplined, firepower-heavy defenders could defeat numerically superior attackers, no matter how fanatical their courage. More importantly, they had demonstrated that American forces could adapt tactics, exploit enemy weaknesses, and maximize their own technological and training advantages. The ridge, forever after known as Edson's Ridge, became the grave of Japanese hopes for victory on Guadalcanal. The 800 Marines who held it proved that against thorough preparation, professional training, and exceptional leadership, numerical advantage meant nothing. The first light of dawn tinted the jungle canopy gold green. Edson looked down from the ridge at the battlefield below, a scene that defied all staff officers' predictions about Japanese resilience and fighting power. Bodies lay scattered along the approaches, each cluster telling the story of a failed assault, their positions marking the limit of one of the most concentrated enemy attacks of the Pacific War. The silence on the ridge held an almost supernatural quality, broken only by the resuming calls of tropical birds in the distance. PFC Mudd climbed from his foxhole for the first time in 6 hours, his limbs stiff from maintaining a defensive posture all night, blood circulation returning. His legs felt unsteady as he stood. The young Marine stared blankly at the killing ground below. The industrial-scale death he had witnessed was something no training exercise could simulate. Japanese equipment lay scattered among the dead, rifles with their distinctive long bayonets, light mortars that had never found their range, and canvas packs whose personal contents were strewn across the jungle floor. Basilone supervised the cleaning of his heavy machine gun, running a cleaning rod to a barrel to remove the carbon buildup. From nearly 4,000 rounds fired during the night, the weapon had performed perfectly throughout the battle, the water-cooled design preventing overheating at the most critical moments. But the gunny understood that mechanical reliability meant nothing without effective tactical employment. He had proven what American heavy machine gun tactics could do to attacking infantry when properly executed. As Marine patrols began moving across the battlefield to gather intelligence and assess enemy casualties, the full extent of Japanese losses became clear. Kawaguchi had committed the equivalent of 3 full battalions to the ridge attack, about 2,500 men, including some of his most experienced combat units. In the end, fewer than 800 remained capable of organized resistance. Many of those wounded or separated from their units during the chaotic retreat. For Japanese strategic planning, the defeat was particularly devastating because the forces destroyed weren't raw recruits or second-line garrison troops, but veteran infantry who had fought successful campaigns across the Pacific. Many of Kawaguchi's soldiers had participated in the conquest of the Dutch East Indies and the Philippines. Japanese planners believed this combat experience was crucial for offensive operations against American forces. The loss of so many veterans struck a blow to Japanese military capability that extended far beyond immediate tactical situation on Guadalcanal. The implications of Edson's tactical victory resonated at the highest levels of military strategy on both sides of the Pacific War. For American commanders, the successful defense of the ridge proved the Japanese weren't invincible, that numerical superiority and fanatical could be overcome by professionalism and effective firepower application. This lesson influenced U.S. tactical doctrine for the remainder of the war, encouraging commanders to trust their training and equipment even in seemingly hopeless situations. The Japanese response to the failure exposed fundamental flaws in their strategic thinking that earlier victories against unprepared opponents had masked. Kawaguchi's after-action reports blamed insufficient artillery support and limited reconnaissance time, but these explanations avoided the core problem. Japanese infantry tactics were designed for opponents who lacked American firepower and tactical sophistication. No amount of additional preparation could overcome this doctrinal limitation. American intelligence officers interrogating captured Japanese soldiers discovered that Kawaguchi's troops had been told they would face demoralized American defenders who would collapse in the face of determined attacks. This fundamental misjudgment of Marine capabilities reflected a widespread Japanese misunderstanding of American fighting power, a misunderstanding that would prove costly throughout the Pacific War. The notion that Western soldiers lacked the spiritual fortitude for sustained combat had been decisively refuted in the most conclusive manner possible. The strategic impact of the battle extended beyond immediate military considerations, influencing the entire direction of the Pacific Campaign. Henderson Field remained in American hands, providing a base for air operations that would gradually strangle Japanese supply lines. To the remaining troops on Guadalcanal, unable to reinforce or supply their positions, Japanese commanders faced the prospect of fighting a defensive campaign with inadequate resources against an enemy controlling the sea lanes and skies around the island. For the Marines who fought on the ridge, the victory validated training methods and tactical principles that had been questioned during months of preparation stateside. The emphasis on individual marksmanship, small unit tactics, and aggressive use of supporting weapons had proven effective against an enemy renowned for military prowess. More importantly, they had proven to themselves and observers across the Pacific that American forces could not only match Japanese combat effectiveness, but surpass it when properly led and equipped. The human cost of the victory, while light by Pacific War standards, represented irreplaceable losses for a unit that wouldn't receive replacements anytime soon. 43 Marines had been killed in the fighting, with another 97 seriously wounded and requiring medical evacuation. Each casualty represented years of training and combat experience that couldn't be quickly replaced. This also highlighted the importance of tactical victories that achieved strategic objectives while minimizing friendly losses. Edson's personal leadership during the battle became a classic case study in small unit command, analyzed and emulated within the Marine Corps for decades to come. His decision to allow the Japanese to surround his position, which to observers unfamiliar with the ridge's defensive advantages looked like tactical suicide, had maximized the effectiveness of American firepower, while minimizing Japanese advantages in numbers and close combat capability. Edson's Ridge was more than just another tactical victory. In the long struggle for control of the Pacific, it marked a fundamental shift in the balance of Japanese and American military effectiveness that would characterize the remainder of the war against Japan. American forces had proven that superior training, equipment, and leadership could overcome any advantages in numbers or fighting spirit the enemy might possess. The lessons learned in the jungles of Guadalcanal would echo across every battlefield, from the Solomon Islands to the Japanese home islands, carried forward by the Marines who witnessed the birth of American tactical dominance in the Pacific theater. On the morning of September 14th, the stream of radio reports reaching Japanese headquarters painted a picture Kawaguchi could scarcely comprehend. His brigade, which had left its assembly area days before with over 3,000 men, was no longer a cohesive fighting force. Commanders of units still in contact reported casualty rates exceeding 60%. Many companies were down to fewer than 20 effectives. The 35th Infantry Brigade, once considered among the Imperial Japanese Army's elite formations, had been shattered in a single night of fighting. Survivors of the attack stumbled back through the jungle in small groups, many carrying wounded comrades, which slowed their retreat and made them vulnerable to American pursuit. Japanese military doctrine had never seriously considered the logistics of large-scale withdrawals, viewing victory or death as the only acceptable outcomes for imperial forces. Now Kawaguchi faced the unprecedented challenge of evacuating his remaining troops while maintaining enough organization to prevent complete disintegration. Captain Suzuki, one of Kawaguchi's few company commanders still in position, had watched the final attack from a forward observation post with a clear view of the American line. His report to brigade headquarters described how Marine positions maintained disciplined fire, even when Japanese soldiers closed within 20 yards of their foxholes. Suzuki noted that the Americans never seemed to panic, never lost tactical cohesion, and answered every Japanese rush with coordinated counterfire that eliminated attackers with mechanical precision. American intelligence officers monitoring Japanese radio communications found an increasing desperation in enemy transmissions as unit commanders try to account for scattered forces. Intercepted messages revealed Kawaguchi had lost contact with more than half his subordinate units, many of which had been annihilated with no survivors to report their fate. Those still in communication painted a consistent picture of catastrophic casualties and tactical collapse. The repercussions of the failure extended far beyond the immediate battlefield, affecting Japanese strategic planning for the entire Solomon Islands campaign. High Command had designated Kawaguchi's brigade as the spearhead of a larger offensive to recapture Henderson Field and eliminate American air power from the region. The failure of this attack forced a fundamental reassessment of Japanese capabilities and revealed that military planners in Tokyo had seriously underestimated American defensive strength. For the Marines on the ridge, the full scale of their victory became clear as patrols brought back reports and enemy equipment and casualties were found. Scattered across square miles of jungle, the sheer volume of abandoned Japanese material told the story of an army in full retreat. Rifles discarded to speed movement, mortars left behind when their crews were killed or wounded, and personal equipment littering every trail leading away from the battlefield. Intelligence specialists sorted through captured weapons and documents, building a comprehensive picture of Japanese tactics, organization, and equipment that would prove invaluable in future fighting. PFC Mudd joined a reconnaissance patrol that ventured beyond the immediate defensive line to assess the extent of Japanese losses. What he saw on that patrol would stay with him for the rest of his life. Enemy soldiers' bodies in various poses of death that told the story of each failed assault, the patterns of their scattered equipment, and weapons testifying to the intensity of American defensive fire. Many Japanese positions showed signs of direct hits from artillery or mortar shells. Entire squads obliterated in single explosions, leaving craters surrounded by fragments and debris. Barcelona supervised the redistribution of ammunition recovered from Japanese supplies, examining captured rifles and machine guns, and assessing their performance and potential battlefield utility. Japanese weapons showed fine craftsmanship, but reflected a design philosophy completely different from America's. American weapons emphasized sustained fire and mechanical reliability, while Japanese designs prioritized accuracy and ammunition conservation, reflecting different tactical doctrines and manufacturing capabilities. The battle's strategic significance resonated with senior commanders on both sides, who tried to understand what had happened on the ridge. American generals saw a validation of training programs and tactical principles developed in peacetime, but never tested under combat conditions. The emphasis on small unit leadership, individual marksmanship, and coordinated use of supporting weapons had proven devastatingly effective against an enemy renowned for military capability. Japanese military leaders faced a more difficult task, explaining how elite infantry formations had been destroyed by numerically inferior enemies fighting from prepared positions. Traditional Japanese military thought had emphasized spiritual strength and offensive tactics as keys to victory, but these concepts had proven inadequate against American firepower and defensive expertise. The defeat forced a painful recognition that technological advantage and professional training could overcome advantages in numbers and fighting spirit. Kawaguchi's personal fate illustrated the broader impact of the tactical disaster. The general, once hailed as one of Japan's finest field commanders, effectively saw his career end with the failure on Guadalcanal. Superiors in Tokyo blamed insufficient leadership and poor tactical judgment, criticisms that avoided the fundamental problems in Japanese doctrine and strategic assessment that had made the disaster inevitable. The medical aftermath of the battle revealed another dimension of the Japanese defeat. American medics treating wounded prisoners discovered many enemy soldiers suffering from malnutrition and tropical diseases that significantly reduced their combat effectiveness. Japanese logistical systems, stretched thin by extended supply lines and American air attacks, had proven incapable of maintaining fighting units at full strength during extended campaigns in hostile environments. While the American casualties were tragic for the families and units involved, the exchange ratio was extraordinarily favorable, validating the tactical decisions made throughout the battle. 43 dead and 97 wounded Marines had inflicted losses on the Japanese at a rate exceeding 20-1, a ratio that reflected both the defensive advantages of the ridge and the superior effectiveness of American weapons and tactics. The political impact of the victory extended beyond military calculations, influencing both American morale and Japanese strategic thinking across the Pacific. When news of the victory reached the United States, public opinion about Pacific War prospects remained skeptical. The Marine victory provided concrete evidence that Japanese forces could be defeated through thorough preparation and professional competence, encouraging continued support for the massive military expansion that would ultimately prove decisive. The ridge that witnessed the transformation of the Pacific War stood silent in the afternoon heat, its slopes littered with the debris of battle, but no longer contested by hostile forces. For the 800 Marines who had held their ground against overwhelming odds, the victory validated everything they had learned about war, leadership, and the strength of disciplined soldiers fighting for a cause they understood and believed in.